Derek, would you like to be a co-host so you can speak?
I'll do whatever you want me to do.
Oh, it looks like you can speak.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Welcome to the DEI room.
Yeah.
Joy, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks, Oscar.
Okay. Brittany, do we have everybody in right now?
Yes, we do.
Great. I'll
Yeah,
go
I can see
ahead and
participants.
get us started. Welcome to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Breakout Room and Input Station. My name is Monica Irons. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the city's Human Resources Director and co-lead of this session. With me as co-lead is Christine Dietrich, our city attorney, and our HR analyst, Brittany Rolgan, is providing technical support tonight and queuing everybody up. As you've heard through the instructions, the purpose of the session is to hear from you on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that could be incorporated into council's development of major city goals. As co-leads, Christine and I are here to ensure that all views can be voiced in a safe and respectful environment. You can voice your input by typing it into the chat and or by raising your virtual hand. Brittany will be queuing up the speakers for us. You'll be unmuted when it's your turn to speak. Feel free to turn on your video at any time if you'd like to. For those of you who participated in past community forums, our chat feature is the equivalent of writing on the flip chart, and that'll be incorporated into the online survey. In order for everyone to participate, please keep your comments brief and focused on the items that you'd like council to consider. Before I get started, I also want to recognize that we've got Dale McGee and Bea Makakau, who project managed and facilitated the city's DEI task force here in the room with us tonight. Those task force recommendations were accepted by council on Tuesday night and are available on the city website. We can also drop a link in to the chat. So with that, we'll open it up for comments.
It looks like Sandra is raising their hand. Sandra, you can go ahead. It looks like you're unmuted, and then we'll move to Claire after Sandra is done.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know how to turn on my video. But anyway, I want to start by saying that I appreciate you guys putting this forum together. I think it's so important. I would like to tell you also that, oh, here we go. Okay, all right. So I am also going to tell you that I'm a descendant of the Pipil tribe from El Salvador, and I came to this country when I was 16 and a half years old. And I want to tell you that I moved here in 2004 with my husband from downtown Los Angeles, and he's a doctor, I'm a nurse. And I want to tell you that I felt nothing but welcome here, always. Have I experienced racism? I have, but you know, it's been such a small individual that I refuse to label an entire community as racist for the actions of a few individuals. Having said that, I think that, you know, this whole name calling of white privilege and all of this nonsense, I think is very divisive, hurtful, and not productive. I think that it really hurts us as a community. I also, you know, let me just tell you something. I've been called a white supremacist, but people in the mayor's campaign. Do you know why? Because I participated in supporting Cherise Sweeney. I was actively participating in her campaign. I was called a white supremacist pretending to be an immigrant. I mean, that is the other issue is that I am against. I think that this country gives you the freedom to do and protest, and I think it's great. I come from a country where you couldn't protest, where women with their breath were cut while they were alive and their nails were ripped out of their fingers. For students, because they were speaking out against the government. I don't want to be silenced. I don't like when people abuse that right, that freedom of speech. To me, when you take onto the freeway and start yelling obscenities to citizens who are just having a great time, that is so divisive and not productive. I support the Black Lives Matter movement. I
Hey,
support-
Sandra, excuse me. I thank you very much for your input. I do need to be respectful of other people who have their hands up. Is there specific input that you'd like council to consider?
So what I would like council to consider is that I don't think that we need to be spending money that we don't have in these difficult times. I think that we can do this on a volunteer basis. We have plenty of citizens like myself, like Vanessa Salas, who come from different countries. We can organize, we can do this on a volunteer basis, you know, and educate the community as to who we are only through coming together. I think that this is more productive and less expensive in my opinion.
Thank you very much for that. I think our DEI task force was an excellent example of volunteerism in this area.
Mhm.
And with that, Brittany, do you want to do the next speaker? Thank you very much.
Sure. Claire, you can go ahead and unmute, and then Kevin, you will be after Claire.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for holding this space tonight. I very much appreciate it. I do have some recommendations, and this comes from my experience being a Cal Poly student, and also having 2 majors and 2 minors that are reflective in all of this. So things that we need to do is, one, defund the police. They don't need a $55 million expansion. That money should go back into housing, especially when looking at the budget, housing was considering $1 million. When a house here costs $1 million, and we live in one of the whitest areas in California. So, and it's because of how expensive it is here. And the median income still is about less than $50,000. So it's too much. We need to build more affordable housing here as one. Another one we need to do is defund the cops. Cops do not protect people, especially Black and Indigenous people. There's proven record, cops are complacent in white supremacy, especially here in this area. And then it's also effective within Cal Poly. We have seen time after time how many Blackface has went on campus and the racist comments they have done. So for them to say that white supremacy does not exist here, exists here very much. And to waste, and another thing too is we also need city council to stop preying on Cal Poly students for their votes and then going against their best interest when it comes to voting for city council issues. And and also we need COVID mitigation. We need housing relief. We need rent relief and mortgage relief, because that's another reason that affects a lot of the working class, because the working class is predominantly low income and BIPOC folks that and in a predominantly white area, which again, another way of white supremacy and very classist. So in order to change all of this, it starts with defunding the police, investing that into affordable housing, converting hotels into housing too for houseless folks, and then to actually take care of your Cal Poly students, because they do make up 40% of the population, and not to mention that we are the whitest school in California. And the fact that students here don't feel safe, and that's why people continue to not live here time after graduation and continue to move back into bigger metropolitan cities, is because of the racism here. But yes, thank you.
Thank you. And as a reminder for participants, feel free to drop comments into the chat in addition. Brittany, next speaker.
Yeah. Kevin, you are up, and then Jordan, you are next.
Good evening. My name is Kevin. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a local school teacher. I teach in Santa Maria, but I've lived here in San Luis 3 years, born and raised on the Central Coast prior to that. My question would be for City Council and for the mayor and all the people putting in the hard, boring, diligent, behind the scenes work. My question would be, I feel I'm kind of at a crossroads with seeing the disparities in equity and justice of policing with people of color and people like myself who are white, and I've never had to deal with that. but also I'm at the other side of someone in my line of work where I'm working with law enforcement. I'm working with people who are there to supposedly serve and protect. And my big question would be, how, as city council and how as a community, are you taking steps to bridge the two voices? Or the way I wrote it at the beginning of this meeting, how is the $50 million going to function as a win-win for even the most divided parties and voices in San Luis? I'm not here to say no new building for our police officers. I have friends who are police officers who described to me what it's like. But I as a citizen and as someone who works with students of color and migrant communities and voices who have been felt very attacked by the police, I want to know that my dollars are not putting them in danger. I want to know that they're actually serving and protecting us and dignifying officers who say they want to do their job. And they, just like me as a teacher, have every right to do their job well. And I'll tell you this, as a citizen who has no problem saying defund the police, because I know the subtext, meaning reallocate funds for community needs, right? Me yelling it at this point, I'm really struggling with the fact that I don't feel I'm helping. That's my call. I cannot speak on anyone else's behalf, but I want to know, and I would ask the community or the city council that they can help people like me understand where my dollars are going. Is it just a nice building, or are things dilapidated? Is it going into training? Is it going into racial equity and services that are going to make our officers not a threat, but instead community members we can count on? That's outside of my knowledge, but I can check receipts, and that is my right as a citizen. So I yield my time, and I hope I could get some good answers on that at some point.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Jordan, you are up, and at this moment we don't have a speaker or nobody is raising their hand after you, Jordan. So go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Jordan Martinez. I go by she, her pronouns, and I have lived in SLO for the past 2 decades. I grew up here, seen a lot of families move in and out. As far as not only financially, it is hard to live here, but due to racism and the white supremacy environment, that is not always evident, but it is there if you are living through it. And so one of my suggestions is not only to follow the recommendations of the DEI task force, but to also make a standing committee or something that will ensure. I was in the city council meeting last night, and they said for the budget, we will take climate change and diversity into account for all decisions. I would like to see a committee or some sort of accountability to ensure that that is being done within the city. As well as I had a question about the racism as a public health crisis. What are we doing about that, and how can we best aid in treating that? That's a broad term. I don't know what it looks like because there is no quantitative way to define or count racism. It could be just small acts, like when I was at Sierra Vista Hospital and the nurse decided I wasn't in that much pain at the time. So I would just like to see a continuation of the work that the DEI task force has started, because it's just a start. So I'd like to see accountability held, as well as just for safety purposes. My mom does work in the jail and with the law enforcement culture there. I would like to see accountability held to those who continue to perpetuate the white supremacy culture that is within law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Sandra, it looks like you have your hand up again. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I want to answer to Kevin, and I think it was you, Jordan. I think that, accountability, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I'm really, as a nurse, I'm appalled. I'm disgusted and sad that somebody would question your pain, because I would never do that. I try to care for people with compassion and with the care that I would want for myself, and the dignity and the respect. And what I want to say to Kevin in regards to the defund the police, I do think that our police departments do need reform, but I think the language we use is very important. It's not what we say, it's how we say it. That's what I've learned in nursing. And I think that really the key word that we really should be using is reform. Because I think that if we said reform the police, I think we can get a lot of the citizens behind us. Because I tell you, nobody wants, I don't want me or my children or my gay Black friends to be harassed by anybody. None of us do. But I think that the words we choose, I think, do matter. I think if we chose the word reform instead of defund, I think that would be a better thing. The other thing that I thought, everybody talks about having social workers in the police department. And I think that San Luis Obispo could be the starting point of something here. I can tell you that I've always said, if a nurse had a gun instead of stethoscopes, I would be a mass murderer right now. But I tell you what, we as a nurse, because nurses is one of the most trusted professions, I think that if a nurse showed up to a situation with the police officer, and especially dressed in white or something like that, where you are identified as a nurse, that automatically puts somebody at ease instead of seeing somebody with a gun. Of course, the police would be there standing by to assist if necessary. But I think that as nurses, we have a little bit more training. We can take care of the health aspect of it. We can do vital signs. If somebody's having difficulty breathing or some sort of health thing, we can assist with that. I think that's probably would be a better situation than social workers. Nothing against social workers, but I think that maybe nurses are the answers. What do you guys think?
Thank you for that. And I'm seeing some comments on the chat regarding the definition of defund. I think some of you are commenting about shifting funding. I think it might be helpful for council to hear thoughts and ideas in terms of where you'd want to see it shifted. And then I also wanted to respond to the comment or the question about the police building itself. That would be a capital project that would be coming forward. And I do think that that's coming back to council or coming to council planned in the spring. Through the financial planning process, we prioritize capital investments. And so I'm sure that you will hear more on that effort.
Okay, it looks like in order, we've got Jordan, Nancy, Brandon, and then Kevin. So Jordan, go ahead and unmute.
And Brittany, maybe we could invite some folks who haven't had an opportunity first before we run out of time, if folks who've already had an opportunity wouldn't mind.
That's what I was just about to say. I was like, go for it.
Great. Nancy, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to express my support for the DEI task force, just because it brought out so many great recommendations. And like Jordan said, I would also like to see it be a staple, especially because it's so important right now to increase the diversity and inclusion in San Luis Obispo. And I just wanted to specifically bring your attention to how all of the issues that we're facing right now are actually really connected, and it's about the intersectionality of it. So if we could get more affordable housing here in San Luis Obispo and then lower the rent for local businesses, we could attract more communities of color and keep them in, just because specifically I haven't felt so supported in San Luis Obispo as a woman of color. And I would also just like to reiterate the less policing and less funding for policing, just because they're not helpful and they don't make us feel safe. And not funding a 3-story police building. Thank you.
Great. Brandon, go ahead. And then Dale would like to respond to Jordan's comments as she has some follow-up. So Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, first off, just want to again voice support for the work that the DEI task force has been doing. And I would like to see the city continue on to that, continue on with that, because that's not just like something that can have a one-time fix or is a one-time issue. Yeah, I wanted to address that as far as being careful with words. I think defunding means defund, and you shouldn't like, I don't think that you have to pretend like there's some like different thing that people are trying to say, like defunding the police means defunding. I mean, they're the highest funded department in our city, and yet we have clearance rates on many major crimes, the things that we think that police do, that are really shockingly low. Our SLO PD's clearance rate on rape is 16%, 29% on robbery, 13% on property crime, 7% on burglary, 12% on crime. I mean, what are we spending our money on if they're so bad at solving the crimes that are happening here, and how is that protecting us? I know that during city council runs, people talked to downtown businesses and they voiced their support that the downtown ambassadors are actually better at dealing with unhoused people downtowns than the bike police that just tend to harass and displace people and then they end up coming back. So I'd like to see the city partner more with downtown ambassadors and people who are trained to give people the support that they need and also don't cost the city $750,000 a year. They're much less expensive as well. I'd also like to see, I mean, we just keep doing things over and over again that have no scientific backing for why they're doing it and just keep giving more money to a program that's not showing, they're not dealing with the criminal aspect right now, Sandra. That's what I'm saying. If you commit most crimes, you're going to get away with them. The best they'd have is 47% on aggravated assault. You're more likely to get away with a crime in SLO than you are to get charged with it. So how are they dealing with it right now? I think you should be able to answer how the police are helping, because for me, looking at the numbers, they're actually not. You look at programs like Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon. That's something that I would like the city to look more into. Much cheaper than police. They have one patrol unit always that has a social worker and I think a nurse on it. It's cheaper than paying a police to do the same patrol. They deal with mostly nonviolent crime. And it's been able to help the city for less money. Yeah, thank you, Marshall. So yeah, I think that rather than just going with our guts feelings or like a third grade understanding of what police do, we actually need to look at the data. And the data says that the way that we're policing right now is not working. So I don't know why we would want to spend $50 million on a new police station when there are things that are actually proven, like Cahoots, to help deal with issues of crime better.
Thank you for that. And Dale and Bea, I believe that some of that was addressed in the task force and is included in some of the recommendations.
Yes. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for your time and your continued thoughtfulness and work and commitment to this. And Monica, yes, to confirm what you just said, one of the entire recommendations was looking at the shifting and looking at a more social service community-based response, and in Cahoots is mentioned specifically in looking at those models. I just want to very quickly to Jordan's first comments, and I think a couple others around the accountability piece. I want just because clearly this is a group that has been watching what the task force has been doing, the accountability, and I would like to invite very much this group to hold the city accountable. It is intended that that the HRC will be is charged with actually the body that will the standing advisory body that will be continuing to look at the council and be the interface with the council to make sure that the recommendations still go forward and the work goes forward. So please know that even though the task force has sunset, the advisory body of the HRC, Human Resource Commission, is standing. Specifically to the.
Dale,
Dale?
I think some folks are having difficulty hearing you.
Let me change the speaker.
I can hear you, but you got muted about a minute in, or just a few seconds in.
Is that better?
Not much.
Still sounds a bit like you're in a tunnel.
I am. It is probably figuratively, if not literally. Is that better?
It's still very faint.
Shoot.
You're speaking to the
Better?
recommendation regarding the purview of
Not
the
better.
HRC, is that correct?
Okay.
Yeah, so Dale was just referencing the HRC.
Thanks, Maya.
Yeah, the recommendation document speaks directly to how important it is to have the HRC serve as the standing body in the interim while the city is identifying more systemic and structural means for accountability as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion and what staffing could look like in the long term. So the recommendation is speaking to the HRC having a more direct charge as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that would be the body that would serve as that accountability body in the immediate, given the recommendations of the task force.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Okay, it looks like our next speaker is Marshall.
Yes, hello. So I just wanted to echo Jordan and Brandon's comments. And I want to really thank the city for proceeding with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. I got to sit in on several of their meetings throughout the fall. I was really impressed by the amount of expertise and compassion that our community was able to bring together on that. And I think the recommendations they've brought forward are really great. I think they're the kinds of steps, the steps we need to take with humility to move forward as a community. I think it feels like through the results of how we vote, that this community is ready to move forward, to progress, to become a better community, the community we know we can be. And so taking some of the advice like the DEI task force has put out there and really put it into action is one of the best ways. And I really want to back up what Brandon said there. It's very easy for us to believe that because police have been existent our entire lives, that they are the end all be all for how we deal with crime. But police aren't actually very good at preventing crime. They really only exist as a way for us as a society to punish people who have broken a law. But the police themselves do not answer the causes of crime. And the primary causes of crime tend to be places where our society lets people down. It's because of poverty. It is because of lack of opportunity. It is because of social isolation, lack of healthcare, lack of mental health care. So what our community could be doing is spending our funds proactively, addressing things like housing, addressing things like poverty, homelessness, addressing things like opportunity here in town. And that would go a lot further towards addressing crime than the police, which are currently our largest budget item, and who in the middle of a budget crisis that we are all going through because of this unexpected pandemic, it just seems completely unreasonable to want to spend all this money on a new police station when there are so many other things that would be significantly more equitable and healthier for our community as a whole. So I really appreciate that y'all are having this forum. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I appreciate all the people who spoke before me. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments, and I think they're very consistent with some of the other breakout sessions and the focus that on housing and homelessness and other aspects. Are there other people who would like to speak?
It looks like Claire, you have your hand up, and then Kevin, you just raised your hand. So Claire, go ahead, and then Kevin, you can follow.
Thank you. Thank you again for giving me this time to speak. And thank you to all of those that have spoken. And it's really nice to be able to have this space, and hopefully what we say is actually taken into account and initiated within our community. Another thing as well is in regards to defunding the police and converting that $55 million to actual mutual aid organizations within the communities and not just nonprofits, particularly because a lot of nonprofits still work with police that still actively harm predominantly Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and low income and disabled folks, and everyone else. So that's another thing that we have to look at. And so allowing more funding for organizations that are doing the work that City Council and frankly has not been doing. There are a lot of people out there going out and doing food drives and mutual aid, risking their lives in COVID just to save, to help their community members. And the fact that they're doing it out of their own money says a lot when we live in one of the most expensive places in the county. So we could definitely revert that money and give it to more mutual aids than just NGOs.
Thank you.
All right, Kevin, go ahead.
I'll make it short and sweet. First, I would just reiterate what Marshall was saying. Just a big thank you to everyone who is a part of this. It's just very informative for me, and I would hope that's at least the foundational objective here, that people in the community learn something and then they act on it. And as Marshall said, from a place of humility so that they can move forward. My final request would be, as I heard it about the midway point, that the police station is a capital project and we will know more in the spring. Hey, like I said, I'm a teacher. Spring, I'm like, so what is spring? We're like March, April, like, the more I can know, the better, because last time I checked, I was writing notes about the Higuera Street renovation, and all I wrote is ... $190,000 support project, $275,561 just for the, oh wait, that wasn't just for the concrete, that was $66,000. So I'm still sitting here hearing whether it's Sandra or Marshall or all these voices of differing opinions, and I just keep feeling this anchor of, I want to know the dollar amount. If we can't agree on semantics and agree on terminology, that's fine. We'll work together and move forward together as a community if we can at least follow the receipts and understand who made the call on those and what the justification is thereafter. So that's my final take on it. But thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And just to respond, I appreciate the spring is general. Sorry about that. My understanding is that an estimate for a new police facility is about 55 million. And as I mentioned before, that would go through the capital improvement prioritization process. Typically, we bring that forward in April. And Brittany, do you know the date for strategic budget direction?
I believe it's April 6th that it's going to council.
Okay. So April 6th. And then I do want to clarify that the operating budget, so that is about a facility, the operating budget for the police department is $17.8 million. That is primarily for the personnel associated with our police department.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great. It looks like our next speaker is Oscar.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. Yeah, I had my name's Oscar. I had the opportunity to be on the DEI task force. Just want to speak on behalf of the task force. We literally collected over 900 hours together on listening to our vulnerable and marginalized communities, and a lot of those ideas and those suggestions that they included in our task force sessions were included in our recommendations to City Council. And I think through that effort with the DEI task force, that created better collaborations with our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities within the city. And I think that's just, we agree that the work does not stop after the task force has finished sending its recommendations to City Council. I think this is just the beginning. But one of those recommendations included is establishing a DEI office within city government, building a multicultural center that our communities can use, and also allocating 120,000 city fundings that were distributed to local nonprofits and organizations to advance the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the city. So just wanted to say that a lot of those recommendations and suggestions that we heard from our vulnerable populations were added in our recommendations to City Council. And just thank you for everyone who followed the DEI task force.
Thank you, Oscar, and thank you for all your work. Thank you for summarizing the recommendations.
Great. I just wanted to confirm council has a study session of the police station on April 6th, and the city's strategic budget direction is April 20th.
Thank you, Brittany.
Yeah. Okay. Sandra, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so Marshall says something very interesting, and you know what? I agree with you. See, now through this, now we're talking, because now I can understand what you're trying to say. Because what I hear you say when you both say defund the police, what I hear you say is, you know what? There's going to be all this crime, and it's like all these people are going to go wild. They're going to start hurting us and everything. And there is not going to be anyone to protect us. That's what I hear from you, okay? So, but what Marshall said, that was something interesting. What he said was that it's prevention and through different programs. A while back, I had an idea that, you know what, prevention, just getting children to a point where they don't have to end up being the criminals. They don't have to end up in prisons. And how do we do that? It's very simple, and it would cost us nothing. You know, we have an abundance of retirees in here in this community who are professionals, and they have so much to give. Some of them are lonely, and they would love to have a child that they can talk to. You know, create, like, all we would need is some sort of like background investigation. And you know, initially we have the parent, that person talk to the child. Like, let's say the child want to be a doctor, right? So you find a mentor for that child who's a doctor, and that mentor could call that kid and say, hey, how was your day today? You know what? I care for you. Some of these children, going back to my own childhood when I lived in East LA, I had nobody. The only meals I had were the meals at school. I had nobody to tell me they care or love me. I didn't go to college back then because I didn't even know that that was an opportunity for me. I didn't know that I could go to college. I didn't have that knowledge. And so going back to my childhood years, I'm thinking to myself, what if I would have had somebody like a doctor who was a mentor, who would have guided me through, here's what you need to do. I think that that is something that we can totally nurture in our community.
Thank you for that.
Monica, if I could just jump in quickly and just say one thing in response to everything that folks are saying, and also circling back to a comment that someone made earlier that I wanted to make sure other folks in the community have the context in terms of what it was referring to. There was a comment that related to racism being declared as a public health crisis, and the city, for those who aren't aware, the city did put forward a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. So that's something that happened locally here. But more specifically, like, this conversation I think is really important, and also the role that the task force recommendations are playing is identifying, right, not just declaring that, but then what does our city do in response to that? And what does our city do to address that? Because we've identified the ways in which racism impacts our community and individuals on all levels, mentally, emotionally, housing, economically, and then things like sense of belonging, et cetera. So some of the things that folks are talking about, the note that Garrett put in here, Those are really helpful strategies in addition to the task force recommendations for us to identify as a city on what we do to address that fact that is alive and well within our community and within our city. That does require investment, just not from us as a community, but financial investment. So all of the things I think that folks have been talking about are part of how we hold accountable this resolution, and also think strategically and innovatively about what does that actually mean and what do we do to address that fact. And I think the recommendations started to do a big part of that. They talk about a lot and also encourage folks to look at the appendices where there's many ideas. But that's what we were aiming to gauge in the learning sessions, and what we find so useful from hearing our community about is what are those innovative strategies to acknowledge and address that reality within our community and nationally.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
I just wanted to mention, I was coming back to what Brandon had said earlier around the data, and I don't know, Christine, if you happen to have the information. I'm sure if Chief Smith was here, it'd be better, but it was only about 2 years ago that we finally got the data person back, right, in the police department. And I know that we went through a major software change and everything, and finally we're starting to actually collect data in a better way. So I think that we can actually start to figure out the story as where we're doing well, where we're not doing well, how we can train our staff better, how we can look at the preventive side versus just the taking care of a criminal side. So I think that will help us a great deal. So I just wanted to throw that out there too, is that we're definitely working on that. I've heard a lot of comments, Kevin especially, and I really appreciate it. Something that I have been saying, and I think Derek knows since I've been blue, they probably tell I'm blue in the face, is about our communication. So many times I hear someone telling us that we should do something, and it's like something we're actually already working on or do have a program on, but we're not communicating it well to the general community. And the police station construction aspect, for example, that on April 6th, we'll hear a lot more about it. I know when we started, I was on the subcommittee for the Measure G, and we started talking about how long ago the design was done and the dilapidated building and all those different parts that really should be talked about first before hearing a $55 million amount. So I know we definitely need to do better on our communication, and of course better on our actual work, and I think that's kind of the motto of going forward, is do better.
Thank you. And it was about 2 years ago, I believe, that we restored the crime analyst, and there is focus. And I do believe that the police department annually brings a crime study report to council to make that data and the trends public.
And just for a little bit of context for those who aren't familiar with the role of the crime analyst, it really is to gather that data about crime trends in our community in order to better help focus our police resources and the social worker resource and our neighborhood patrols on community policing and preventative policing, so that we are kind of figuring out how to look at those root causes and best deploy our community resources in a way that's supportive of our community and prevents those criminal activities from kind of taking root and taking us in a different direction.
Are there other comments or questions or other aspects? Bea, you said it so well in terms of, I think what's most helpful for council is to really hear in terms of areas of focus or added strategies around this topic. So want to make sure we're giving the opportunity to people.
Monica?
What's up?
Am I still underwater?
A little bit, but we can hear you, Dale, but it is a little tunnely still.
Give it a try.
I think it's the universe actually telling that it's best if I don't talk.
Is it annoying?
No, it's just, it's faint.
I-
It's not annoying.
I get to be subtle for once. I actually want to weave actually what for this just wonderful audience, so they can maybe keep in mind and then tell others, kind of weave what Bea and then Councilwoman Stewart just said around information and getting information out. Bea had mentioned just briefly all the appendices around ideas, and actually Oscar mentioned this too. Going forward, immediate next steps, Bea and I in the next couple of months are have the privilege of implementing some of the more immediate recommendations while the more system recommendations are put into place. The creation of the office of the DEI, the hiring of staff, setting all those things up, those are longer term. But one thing I would encourage everyone here, if you've not had the chance, please look at those appendices. There are over 100 of ideas. We would like to take the even things that you've written tonight, we will archive those also. We also plan on having a much more robust city public facing DEI webpage that will include an ongoing ideas, even down to things like what was just here with Garrett of just, you know, someone who needed a bicycle, and like maybe just having much more seamless community connections of resources. So things like that. So I hope you all will be aware of that. The city will make it more aware of just how can we help marginalized communities more of a fingertip, at the fingertips, and the city can almost be a connection site for things like that. And so please be looking for that, and please hold the city accountable for that. We want to have the information out and want to be a resource. So that should be forthcoming in the next couple of months. And I'll go back to underwater now.
Oh, no, actually, I think you got clear the more you went on.
Okay. Thanks.
Any more amazing ideas out there? Don't be shy.
Someone put in the chat about an email list or a newsletter, and we do have e-notifications that you can sign up for on many topics. So that we get updates. You can get updates through those emails. If there a way we can post that link in here too?
I can do that.
Thanks, Brittany.
Yeah.
And you can do that in a very focused way, so you're only receiving communications on matters that you're interested in. So you're not getting inundated by communications from the city that you don't want.
And I just want to pipe in with that is one of the things when we were first putting out the DEI applications, you know, I asked Derek and the rest of the staff, I'm like, so where's our list of, you know, all the diversity organizations? How can we make sure we get to them? And there was some blank stares, understanding that they wanted to do that, but they just didn't have that. And so, you know, it was dependent upon Bea and Dale and those of us on the steering committee, Mayor Harmon and myself, to say, okay, well, here's a start. And then from the whole task force, there was more contact information given. And so we need to make sure that we continue to actually have the city reach out to the different marginalized communities, and yet the city may not know how to do that. And so that actually having the strategies around those bridges were really important.
Yeah. It's very, very helpful when folks are talking to us and about us. You can talk about us too without us there, but it's really helpful if you talk to us and let us know what those concerns are. So don't assume that we're aware of them. We really do need to hear from people without an assumption that we understand what's really happening out there in the community.
Sandra just dropped something in the chat regarding vaccinations and encouraging medical professionals to volunteer.
I think part of the, yes, Sandra, I think that's great. And I think that is feedback that we can convey on to County Public Health, who is primarily in charge of those programs. And also I think that we're awaiting a volume of vaccinations to be able to get out at the level where we would be able to utilize those broad scale volunteer opportunities as a community. But County Public Health is the coordinator for those efforts.
Not that you want to listen to a whole entire public meeting, but I do believe on Tuesday we talked about how many MedCorps volunteers there already are, and I think there's about 300. So yeah, definitely encourage others, but definitely they're also volunteering for California as well as for SLO County.
And we do have links to those county resources. We've recently updated our vaccination page on the city website as well, with links to all of those resources and the most up-to-date information as we're getting it from the county.
I think Jordan has his hand raised.
Yes, Jordan, you can unmute and go for it.
Yeah, if there's no other things on the table, I'd just like to hear from staff and panelists as far as just within the realm of DEI, how are you keeping your coworkers and yourself accountable as far as anti-bias and anti-racist training? Because I think it all starts with community and, like you were saying, connection and sharing ideas and using the language that is now available to us. So if there's time, I'd love to hear from y'all as far as internally what it looks like.
Sure, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we kicked off, I would say, DEI efforts in earnest over the summer, and have actually are on our second 3-part series of diversity, equity, inclusion training that's open to all employees. We're launching that on a voluntary basis, recognizing that different people are at different points in the DEI journey, focusing really on foundational information, and hoping that people are doing some self-reflection in the organization. We also have a 17-member employee committee that is working on DEI initiatives. And that was the way that we framed that effort, is to actually do an internal audit. And so we had 55 questions that spanned our practices and policies in the area of recruitment and retention and workplace procedures, leadership, that the committee then provided input and responded to, that alerted us to areas where we could actually be doing a better job. And so they're in the process of actually have brainstormed some action items that would feed then into a strategic plan. I could absolutely see that merging with efforts of the task force here in the near future, and leveraging some of the ideas. Dale and I have had several conversations about that. We have an internal website, so a lot of information sharing, hoping to continue the efforts. The employees that are working on that are very passionate about it. We do have an internal newsletter that they're producing and sending out. Christine, Brittany, did I leave anything out?
I was just actually scrolling down to see if Joy was still here.
I was going to say, she sent me a message that she needed to leave. Yeah. Dr. Joy Peterson has been helping facilitate and structure that effort for us.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of efforts coming out of the broadly available education efforts, just at a departmental or division level, that's just about really opening up this space to hear one another and understand what those concerns are, and hopefully really focusing on creating an environment where people are comfortable having what can be a very difficult discussion. And as Monica said, especially recognizing that people are on different places on the spectrum in this journey and in their own personal awareness and their awareness of the bigger context that we're all working from. So I would say a good solid start is where we are.
Okay, it looks like we have a couple of hands raised. We've got Lisa and Tim who have not spoken yet, and then Claire. So Lisa and Tim, you can go ahead, and then Claire, you can follow them.
Just a quick comment. I was gonna say that the more we have Black, Indigenous, people of color in leadership, the fewer missteps we'll have because we'll have leaders that actually, you know, care to share their lived experience and will guide us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was just an idea because we are talking about how to get more communication and whatnot. And I think another thing too is a lot of these groups that do mutual aid and organizing within our community are predominantly Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And would there be some kind of way for the DEI to actually, we could do a monthly meeting with all these groups within the area and just have representatives, 1 or 2 representatives from each group, and that would get more input, especially since a lot of these groups have firsthand experience working with the communities and all sorts of different communities.
Thank you. And I see on the chat kind of a similar suggestion. I'm wondering if Dale or Bea, whoever is easier to hear, did this theme come up during the task force conversations? Opportunity for people to gather and share?
Yeah, I mean, I think it came up a lot, and it came up in both capacities. One where, similar to our learning session model, there needs to be more opportunities from folks from our diverse communities to come together, and also just the community at large to have conversations that are focused in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know the HRC is looking specifically at ways to continue that effort, and in a more formal and structuralized way that the city can help support. In terms of bringing folks together. But as far as, you know, community engagement and ways to mingle, it's been a huge topic of conversation that Dale and I have been having in both, you know, thinking forward when we're back in person and we can gather, but also currently in terms of the virtual world and how do we increase opportunities for our community and also tap into some of the opportunities that we know are available through Cal Poly and through Cuesta, through virtual events and programs and increasing access to our community and having a tighter bridge with both institutions as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion events. So we're working on that. I know I'm working on it on my end to do what I can to increase access. One, you know, we've started a couple of things. We hope to increase access to Cal Poly's Teach-In, which is an entire day of programs and workshops for folks to come in rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we'll be having a city-specific session during that day. So there's a lot of conversation around how do we increase community engagement, how do we increase sense of belonging, and also just diversify the opportunities and events that we offer to our community to participate in and build community. So definitely been on topics of discussion, and we are strategizing ways on how to do that for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Bea.
And we also maybe envision, and this has just been floating, of, you know, having almost an on-demand group, just of interested, involved people, that if the city has something, and this is the idea of the city does everything through a DEI lens or checks it. And so maybe if there's something that there's just this en masse group and it's just like, hey, this is going on. Hey, en masse group, what do you think? It's just that informal sort of touchstone, and it could just be, you know, very ad hoc, but just that notion of just other eyes on it, other experiences on it. And so we kind of just pictured that. So that whole notion of just the whole spectrum. So from very, very, very informal touch to very structured. And we're taking lots of ideas. So chat. there. So chat there, please.
And I do want to say that, one of the recommendations we talked about was, creating more of civic and leadership learning opportunities for the whole community. And back to the leaders, I think you mentioned it, Lisa, that how do we have more BIPOC leaders if they don't know where to even go? That's something that we hope that we can create in this community, because otherwise, if we don't invite people in, they're not just going to volunteer necessarily.
Erica, thank you for that. Something that is very intriguing to me, and this is a definite bias, is the legislation that California has on private corporations. And it's the only state in the union that has that, requiring that, and it's a graduated law that by 2024 now or 25, publicly held companies have to have on their boards both representation from women, so it has to have gender equity, and then last year it was put into law, has to have BIPOC representation, and it goes up based on how big your board is. I know there's restrictions to what a public agency to do, but I think there's a model there that would be very interesting to follow or at least push for. So if not legally can do it, but maybe the spirit of it. So I think there's something there that would be wonderful to start talking about. Does something like every advisory board at the city has X number of women, X number of BIPOC, or I think there's something there. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry I came to, this is my last room. I was trying to go to everything, of course, as usual. But I want to just say that I'm definitely going to look at the recording of the session. There probably were more people in it at the beginning and more dialogue going on. But I just wanted to lend my support and also learn, hear different kinds of ideas that people might have in terms of improving the situation. So.
Thank you.
Great. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Is that right? We're going till 8:15.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. It looks like Sandra, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I actually typed the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I think here is one important aspect, and I don't know, I think Dr. Slaughter was on the line. So as you all know, I'm an ICU nurse, and a large percentage of our COVID patients are Hispanics who work in the fields for the most part, or in restaurants or whatever. They tend to live in crowded quarters, and a lot of them don't speak English. And in a lot of the cases, either they are undocumented or they know somebody who is undocumented or somebody in their home. For example, we had this one guy in King City who was the driver. He was documented. He got COVID. He came in, he was so sick. He would not tell them who he'd been around. So what happened was somebody ended up like doing a little bit of research. They followed him and they went and they found the group in a motel, and all like 35 out of 40 people were COVID positive. This guy nearly died. So I think a lot of it, when I asked him, I said, well, why don't you, it's easy for us to say, why don't you look for it and you get help? A lot of them, they have the fear that they're going to be reported to immigration and they're going to be deported. So I think they all listen. A lot of them listen to Spanish radio. And I think it would really be helpful in any way, like, throughout the state. I mean, the state should be doing this. And in Spanish radio, Spanish, advertising to say, to please seek help if they're sick, because we will not report them to immigration. We are not in the business of reporting anybody to immigration. This is nothing to do with immigration. So I think that's really important. If we're going to decrease our numbers, I think we need to get active and really take that seriously.
Dale, did you want to, it looks like you dropped some information on that in the chat. Did you want to add any more?
No, I think that's it. I mean, there's like different Spanish radio stations. You know, the churches I know can do that. You know, the employers, a lot of the employers have people that come in, they have documents, but they're not legal in many chances. And it's like, I think it's important for the employers to let their workers know, like, hey, if you feel sick, it's okay to seek help. Like, no one is going to do anything. I think that's really important to do.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And it looks like there's a couple of resources that were dropped in the chat in terms of the NOR clinic, and CAPSLO working on outreach, more extensive outreach.
I saw a
Oscar
comment.
works with that population too. I don't know if he would want to say more than he wrote. It is extremely vulnerable population, and it is not going to seek traditional care. I don't know, Oscar, if you want to say more on that. But certainly resources are needed, and it has to be resources that's from that community, not externally. I mean, it needs to be responsive to.
Yeah, definitely. As a member with the Central Coast Coalition for Undocumented Student Success, we definitely touched on this area, spreading awareness of the vaccine. I think it's difficult right now just because with California's stages on where they're at with the vaccine. We're trying to see where is that category of field workers, undocumented workers listed at, and is there any information that I think it's going to be released soon by city government that we can use to utilize to spread to our undocumented community. But we also have to communicate and advocate for protection for undocumented communities, that their information won't be released or the limit of information, just because asking for a social security card, it's not optional for them. So that's just something we're still trying to figure out. We ponder with that question, but I wish I had more information to give, just because we're still thinking about that process.
I think I heard a bell that is our time limit to go back to.
Oh yeah, how do we do that? Okay.
And you can get there. If you don't know, it's in the chat, but I do want to thank all of you for expressing your input, for taking the time to spend with us tonight, for providing your feedback. And this will be incorporated, as we said at the beginning, and you'll have the opportunity to see it reflected in the community survey that goes out tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time with us tonight.
Thank you. Okay, open Zoom meetings. Look at that. It's amazing.
Everyone.